Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Meredith.
This is No Talking in the Library, roof repair edition. You may hear the occasional hammering sound from the people directly above me. We'll see if we can play through that. It's high summer now, and normally baseball would be going on in this country, which is, you're not a huge baseball fan, are you? So far as I know.
It's America's pastime. So, there's
Sure.
nothing not to like about the idea of, sitting in a baseball stadium, drinking a beer and, watching the game. But I do like, we've talked about my affinity for sports movies, and I think some of the finest sports movies are baseball movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's too bad that we're having to postpone that our Olympic movie night program, which hopefully we'll get to at some later point if they have the Olympics, because that would have been. I think that was one of the things we were going to show as A League of Their Own, which is an excellent movie and one of the best sports movies ever made. But yeah, so when we were talking about what we might talk about for this episode, I had just recently watched a documentary called A Long Way from Home. It came out in 2018. It's available on Canopy for those who are interested in watching it. And it's about the generation of African American and Latino players who came up after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947. I think a lot of times, people don't think about it very carefully or whatever. They'll just sort of think, well, and there was Jackie Robinson and there was Larry Doby, who broke the color barrier in the American League, playing for the Cleveland Indians, and then it was all fine, which is not really true. Many of the things that had been part of the color barrier leading up to Jackie Robinson coming up and playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers were still there, and this is a really interesting documentary about the difficulties that these players had playing the game, finding acceptance, and trying to sort of make their way in an environment which was not, in a lot of respects, very accepting to them.
Yeah, I watched this just this afternoon. It's only about 45 minutes, so it's a nice, easy watch. And I think what struck me was, Jackie Robinson was playing for a major league team, but all of these men who came after, a lot of them were playing for minor league teams in like Arkansas and, Sarasota. They weren't necessarily in, I don't know, hard to say, metropolitan areas in the 1940s, but
Sure.
they were in areas that were even less probably accepting, and so they were, forced to be in these communities and attempt to live lives in places they were really not welcome.
Yeah, a lot of the minor league teams for the major league teams were in these southern areas. Spring training tended to be either in Florida or I think it got started later on in Arizona, but
It's
but
definitely Arizona, because I know I'm always on planes with Indians fans going out to Arizona when I go to see my family.
right, yeah, I've been down to spring training a couple of times to watch Yankee spring training games. But but a lot of these minor league teams were in areas where racism was very pronounced, and I think we both have a bit of the northerner prejudiced looks at the South and says, well, so how much worse it was down there. There's certainly plenty of racism in northern cities for sure, but there's a sort of a difference in the experience of those players versus the players who come up in the Negro leagues, because they were going around in black communities in Birmingham and in Kansas City and Chicago and all these places. So there was much less of these experiences. Like I just happened to be watching some episodes of the Ken Burns baseball documentary, and Curt Flood, the famous player for the Cardinals, or for the Cincinnati Reds. We played for the Cardinals too. I think he played for the Cincinnati Reds, who ended up breaking the reserve system, or being instrumental in breaking the reserve system. Told the story about playing in I forget where in the South, but they got done with the first half of a doubleheader, and all the players threw their uniforms in a pile, and the deal was that the trainer would come through and wash all of them and they'd be ready for the second game. And he said that the trainer came through with a stick with a little nail on it and like gingerly picked his uniform out of the pile and put it in a sort of basket and then sent it off 20 minutes each way to the black part of town, so his uniform wouldn't get washed with the white people's uniform. And I mean, it's really sort of, clearly racism continues to be an issue in the United States, but this is a sort of, nobody should have to put up with this, in sport. It's a really, and you hear the stories about Jackie Robinson, who was just treated really abominably by people especially in the first 3 years. When he came up with the Montreal Royals and then was brought up by Branch Rickey to the Dodgers. And Branch Rickey, he sort of made a deal with Branch Rickey. He was a very fiery guy, actually. And Branch Rickey said, you're going to have the courage not to retaliate. And he had basically, because Branch Rickey knew that the experiment wouldn't work if Jackie Robinson was going to rise to the bait. So he had to spend 3 years getting abused in the absolutely foulest terms while trying to play baseball, which is a game that takes, a lot of concentration. I mean, I've played a lot of soccer, you've played a lot of hockey, and you're in the flow of the game, right? You're going forward or you're going back.
Taking all of that abuse while also needing and being forced to rise above it and turn the other cheek, because otherwise, he would have, and some of the players that are in this documentary talk about, when caught in conflict with their teammates or other players, they were always the one, marked as the instigator. There are really a couple of great anecdotes that they share. My favorite is the one about the guy who was being verbally abused by a player, saying like, just, you better not come to Texas. And he's like, well, we're not in Texas, we're in Ohio. And he totally clocked him. And
Right. Actually, one of my favorite stories, and this I think is really emblematic of Jackie Robinson. In his first year in the league, he was playing first base, and Enos Slaughter was playing for the Cardinals. He's from North Carolina and a pretty notorious racist. And Slaughter, who was out at first by about 10 feet, jumped into the air and spiked Jackie Robinson in the thigh and just opened him up. The Dodgers came out and they wanted to take revenge, and Jackie Robinson said, no. But he turned to Slaughter and he said, I'll remember this. 3 years later, when the gloves were off, so to speak, he was playing second base, which was his sort of more normal position. They were playing the Cardinals. Slaughter hit one deep into the outfield and was trying to stretch a single into a double. And Robinson caught the ball and turned around, and instead of Slaughter was sliding in, instead of tagging him on the foot, Robinson just smashed him in the face with his glove with the ball in it and knocked out 6 of his teeth. Then leaned over him and said, I got you back. I remember what happened. And I think that's it sort of lets you in on what sort of anger was really built up. I mean, I think it in the long run had a kind of bad effect on Jackie Robinson having to bottle all that up. Long Way From Home has some really interesting interview segments in it. It has Ines Cabell and Cookie Rojas and Orlando Cepeda and lots of really interesting guys, just talking about these experiences, which I think a lot of times are forgotten in the way we remember the 50s and 60s in baseball.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's baseball or just sort of sports in general. I know there was a woman, I'm not sure what her name was. She's some sort of probably culture or history scholar in this documentary, but talked about how, these situations where sports and race and culture sort of meet are, reflected in, these things are happening in the culture of baseball, but they're also being reflected in sort of the culture at large. And I was watching there's a new documentary on Netflix called A Secret Love. I'm not sure if you've seen that yet or
I
not.
haven't seen it yet, but it looks interesting.
It's about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, which was dramatized in, of course, the film A League of Their Own, which we have talked about many times in this. And one thing, though, as wonderful as a movie as A League of Their Own is, it does completely ignore the very obvious LGBT history that's part of that baseball league, with many of the players in those leagues and those teams were lesbians, and the people running the league knew this. And in the movie you see the culture, the finishing school classes, the makeovers, the uniforms that were inherently feminine. And although they don't say it in the movie, all that was done specifically to prevent the idea that any of these women could possibly be gay. And in this documentary, A Secret Love, it actually does talk about a couple. Only this didn't realize until I started watching it. Only one of them actually played in the league. And unfortunately, the movie is not quite as much about their experiences in the league as it is about their lives, in their 70s and 80s and 90s. But it is interesting to see that, once again, baseball is sort of a place where culture is sort of, having this moment that is eventually reflected in society. So that's kind of interesting. And hopefully, Abby Jacobson from Broad City is I think they're in the production stage, or who knows what, of doing another version of A League of Their Own with Darcy Carden from The Good Place. So
wow, that would be great.
Yeah, I suspect that will cover anything that the movie might have glossed over.
Right. I mean, people sometimes sort of say, well, why is the integration of baseball on the sort of axis of race, or the axis of sexuality, why is this important? And baseball is so intimately linked to the American psyche, even today. And I mean, so I watch a lot of soccer, and I'm a big hockey fan, as you know well. But there's a point in the spring where, for the first time in a year, like, I'll hear that kind of crack of a baseball against a bat, or like the kind of thwack of the ball in the glove. And I'll remember all the thousands of hours I've spent watching baseball, and how it's been a part of my life, but how, if you watch enough of it, it becomes a kind of metaphor for what the world around you is like. And so it was important. There's another moment, and I was recalling this earlier, that when Jackie Robinson, this was in 1947, the first year that he was playing, they were down. There's some people who say that this happened in Boston, but Red Barber, the broadcaster for the Dodgers at the time, tells a story about Crosley Field in Cincinnati, and anybody watching this will know that Cincinnati is really the South. Let's be honest. But so they were in warm-ups at Crosley Field to play the Reds, and the crowd was booing Jackie Robinson and yelling all kinds of stuff. And Pee Wee Reese, the Dodger shortstop, who was from Kentucky, and who had said, originally, when he was told that Jackie Robinson was going to play, there was a sort of protest movement on the Dodgers when it first happened. Jackie Robinson had been playing some shortstop, and some reporter asked him what Pee Wee Reese thought about the possibility that Jackie Robinson might replace him. And Pee Wee Reese said, if he's good enough to take my job, he's welcome to it. So Pee Wee Reese, in this moment in Crosley Field, when Jackie Robinson is being abused by all these people, goes out to him during the warm-up and talks to him, and then put his arm around him. And it was very moving, because it's Pee Wee Reese sort of saying, like, look, we're friends. This is a perfectly normal thing. You people who are racist and who are like saying all this stuff to him, the train is gone on this. Like, we've accepted him. Like, he's a sportsman. He's our teammate. And that was a key sort of precursor moment. I mean, right after this, this is 1947 to 49, which is sort of the first years of Robinson in the league. This is when, at the beginning of the real civil rights movement in the South, a remarkable, I think if you look at it, it's really a precursor. In the same way, the sort of increasing importance of women's sports, look at Megan Rapinoe. Megan Rapinoe is an out lesbian. Everybody's really fine with it. It's in a certain sense a non-issue, but she got to have this platform in a lot of ways because women's sports has gotten so big, and people, like the way that it's mixed into our culture has sort of facilitated her being able to sort of have her identity be a public thing and have it just not be.
Doesn't hurt that the women's team actually wins their games.
Well, it's true. This is a funny thing about, people are like, women's sports, like the U.S. women's national team. Yeah, they win. When the American men's team, qualifies for the World Cup every time, then maybe they can talk. But her Megan Rapinoe is part of like the most awesome power couple in sports. That is to say, she's married to Sue Bird, arguably one of the 4 or 5 best point guards that's ever played basketball. This, the WNBA has made a sort of very explicit point of saying, like, we want to be a part of these communities. Like, we want these communities to be a part of our culture. And I think it's had a really important and positive effect. So there are these ways that sports can positively, there's a lot of ways that sports can kind of negatively affect culture when they make sort of people angry, or people do dumb things or whatever. But it can also have this sort of positive unifying effect when, we sort of look at it and say, the question about sports is, can you put the ball in the basket? Can you beat someone off the dribble? Can you win the World Cup? And all the other stuff
just kind of fades away.
Right, or gets built into just sort of, this is this person, and that's, okay.
So baseball is the great American pastime and great equalizer.
Yeah, hopefully they can find a way to actually have some baseball this year. They don't seem to be doing a particularly effective job of sorting themselves out. But of the many things that I miss because of the current crisis, one of the ones I find myself, reverting to all the time is, God, I would just like to watch a baseball game, because it's a great thing to do while you're doing something else, or while you're doing nothing, just sort of lie on the couch with a drink and some chips or whatever, and it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful way to live.
That's all I've got.
I think that's all I've got, and probably all people want to hear from us for today. So we'll see everyone next time. Thanks for watching.
All right, we'll see you later.